I am 82 years old, and when you reach my age, you begin to measure time not in hours, but in memories. Some memories fade like old photographs left in sunlight. Others, however, stay sharp, too sharp, like glass buried under sand, waiting to cut you when you least expect it. What I am about to tell you happened 3 years ago, on a Thursday afternoon, in a small restaurant on the corner of Maple and 3rd. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, a peaceful day, a day like any other. But it became the kind of day that sits heavy in your chest, the kind you replay over and over, wishing you had done something differently, even when you know you couldn't have changed a thing. My name is Margaret Ellis, though most people call me Maggie. I live alone now, ever since my husband Harold passed away 12 years ago. We had no children. Life simply didn't give us that blessing, but we had each other, and that was enough. After Harold died, I built myself routines. Routines are what keep old people steady. Without them, days blur into nothing. Every Thursday at noon, I went to Riverside Table, a cozy restaurant not far from my apartment. I had been going there for nearly 5 years. It felt safe, familiar, like a second living room. And the food? Oh, the food was wonderful. Not fancy, not complicated, just honest cooking. Warm bread that smelled like comfort. Soups that tasted like someone cared. Meals that reminded you that kindness could exist in something as simple as a plate of food. But the real reason I went there every Thursday wasn't just the food. It was the owner. His name was Daniel Brooks. Daniel was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with warm brown skin and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled, which was often. He looked like someone who carried both strength and patience inside him. The kind of man who listened before he spoke. He always greeted customers himself if he was near the entrance. "Miss Maggie," he would say every time like clockwork. "You keeping me busy again today?" And I would laugh and reply, "As long as you keep cooking like this, young man, I'll keep showing up." He always called me Miss Maggie, even though I told him 100 times that I was old enough to be his grandmother. There was respect in his voice. Real respect. Not the forced kind you hear these days. I liked that. The restaurant itself was modest but beautiful in its own quiet way. Wooden tables polished smooth from years of use. Small plants by the windows. Soft yellow lights hanging from the ceiling, casting warmth across everything. That Thursday afternoon began like any other. I arrived just before noon. Leaning slightly on my cane, my purse tucked under my arm. The bell above the door chimed gently as I stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around me immediately, carrying the rich scent of roasted garlic and herbs. It felt like home. Daniel was near the counter, speaking with one of the waiters, but as soon as he noticed me, his face brightened. "Miss Maggie," he called. "Right on time." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, smiling. He walked over to me, steady and confident, and pulled out my usual chair near the window. "You know your spot is always ready," he said. "And you know I'm too old to change my habits," I teased. We both laughed. Moments like that may sound small to younger people, but when you grow older, kindness becomes precious. Familiar faces become anchors. I sat down carefully, smoothing my skirt across my knees. Outside the window, sunlight spilled across the sidewalk, and people passed by with busy steps and distracted eyes. Inside, everything felt calm, peaceful, safe. At least at first. About 10 minutes after I sat down, the door opened again. I didn't look up immediately. I was studying the menu, even though I already knew exactly what I wanted. But I heard the sound of high heels striking the floor. Sharp, confident, demanding attention. When I finally glanced up, I saw her. She looked to be in her mid-40s, maybe younger. Well-dressed. Expensive handbag. Hair styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. She carried herself like someone used to being noticed. She scanned the room with quick, assessing eyes, as if measuring the place against some invisible standard. One of the waiters approached her politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Table for one." She nodded, barely looking at him. "Yes. And I hope the food is worth the drive." There was something in her voice that made my shoulders tense slightly. Not anger exactly, but impatience. A sharpness that didn't belong in a place like Riverside Table. Still, the waiter smiled professionally and led her to a table not far from mine. I watched her for a moment longer than I should have. Old age gives you instincts. You learn to read people, not always correctly, but often enough to trust that quiet voice inside your head. And that voice whispered. Something about her felt wrong. But I shook the feeling away. People come in all moods. Some tired. Some stressed. Some rude without meaning harm. I turned my attention back to my menu. Daniel soon came by my table with a glass of iced tea, already prepared the way I liked it, with a slice of lemon. Your favorite, he said. You spoil me, I replied. You earned it, he answered warmly. That was Daniel. Always generous with kindness. As he walked away, I noticed the woman watching him. Not casually. Intently. Her eyes followed him across the room, studying him the way someone studies a stranger they are unsure about. I didn't think much of it at the time. Not yet. A few minutes later, her food arrived. A plate of roasted chicken with vegetables, one of the restaurant's most popular dishes. I watched as she picked up her fork. She took one bite, then another. Her expression shifted. Surprise. Then approval. She raised her hand slightly to signal the waiter. This, she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, is very good. The waiter smiled. I'm glad you like it, ma'am. She nodded slowly. Yes, it's excellent. For a moment, I felt relieved. Whatever strange feeling I had earlier faded. Good food softens people. It always has. She continued eating, slower now, savoring each bite. Then, after finishing half the plate, she spoke again. I would like to meet the owner, she said. Her tone had changed, curious now. Almost eager. The waiter nodded politely. Of course, ma'am. I'll let him know. I watched Daniel from across the room as the waiter approached him, and whispered something in his ear. Daniel nodded with his usual calm smile. He wiped his hands on a clean towel, straightened his apron, and began walking toward her table. At that moment, I felt that strange tightening in my chest again. A feeling I couldn't explain. The restaurant was quiet, comfortable, warm. Sunlight still poured through the windows. Everything looked peaceful. But sometimes peace is only the surface of something deeper. Sometimes trouble walks in dressed nicely, sits down politely, and waits. Daniel reached her table. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said kindly. I'm Daniel, the owner. I heard you wanted to speak with me. She looked up at him. And in that instant, I saw her face change. Not slowly, not subtly, abruptly. Shock. Then disbelief. Then something darker. Something cold. Her eyes hardened as she stared at him. And that was the moment, though I didn't know it yet, when everything began to fall apart. I remember the exact moment her face changed. It was like watching a storm roll across a clear sky, fast, dark, and impossible to ignore. Daniel stood beside her table, hands relaxed in front of him, wearing that same warm smile he gave every customer. Good afternoon, ma'am, he repeated gently. I'm Daniel, the owner. I heard you wanted to speak with me. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. She simply stared at him. Her eyes moved slowly across his face, then down to his apron, then back up again, as if confirming something she did not like. The air around us felt different. Heavier. I shifted slightly in my chair, my fingers tightening around my glass of iced tea. Then she spoke. But her voice was no longer curious. It was sharp. Cold. You're the owner? She asked. Yes, ma'am, Daniel answered calmly. Is everything to your satisfaction? There was a pause. A long one. Then her lips curled, not into a smile, but into something ugly. Something filled with disgust. You, she said again. You're the owner of this place? Daniel remained steady. Yes, ma'am. And then it happened. So fast that for a moment, my old mind struggled to catch up. Her hand shot forward. She grabbed the plate. And before anyone could react, she flung the food straight into Daniel's face. The sound of it, soft chicken and vegetables hitting skin, was sickening. Wet. Sudden. Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped a fork. I froze in my chair, unable to move, my heart slamming against my ribs. The roasted vegetables slid down his apron. Sauce streaked across his cheek. For 1 second, just one, Daniel did not move. He simply stood there, stunned. And then she spoke again. Loud. Cruel. The owner is this, she shouted. This Negro. The word hit the room like a slap. Everything went silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed to stop. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. I had lived long enough to hear that word before. Too many times. In darker years. In uglier times that I thought the world had learned to leave behind. But there it was again. Spoken without shame. Spoken like a weapon. Daniel slowly raised his hand and wiped a piece of food from his cheek. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm going to ask you to leave." But she wasn't finished. Not even close. Her chair scraped violently against the floor as she stood. "I will not eat in a place owned by someone like you," she yelled. Her voice echoed off the walls. Some customers stood up halfway, unsure whether to intervene or stay back. I noticed a young couple near the door grabbing their child, pulling her close. Fear had entered the room. Real fear. Daniel remained steady, though I could see tension in his shoulders now. "Ma'am," he repeated, more firmly this time, "please leave the restaurant." Instead of leaving, she stepped closer to him. Too close. Her face twisted with rage. "You trick people," she spat. "You think you can fool us with good food?" The words made no sense. Not really. But hatred rarely needs logic. I could feel my hands trembling in my lap. I wanted to speak. To say something. Anything. But my voice stayed trapped inside my throat. She shoved him. Hard. Daniel stumbled backward half a step, but didn't fall. Gasps erupted again. "Hey!" someone shouted from another table. "Stop that." But she didn't stop. She raised her hand as if to strike him. And that was when a chair scraped loudly from across the room. A man stood up. He had been sitting alone near the wall, eating quietly until that moment. I remembered noticing him earlier. A broad-shouldered man in plain clothes, calm and observant. Now his voice cut through the chaos. "Ma'am, that's enough." He walked forward quickly, his movements controlled but urgent. "Step away from him." She turned toward him, furious. "Mind your business." But he didn't hesitate. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. The small flash of metal caught the light. "I am a police officer," he said firmly. "You need to calm down right now." A wave of relief rushed through me so suddenly that my chest hurt. A police officer. Right there. All along. For the first time since the incident began, I felt hope. But the woman's anger only grew. "This place is disgusting," she screamed. "I won't be told what to do." The officer stepped between her and Daniel. "Ma'am," he said again, voice steady. "Put your hands down." She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she lunged forward again, trying to push past him. That was when everything moved fast. Too fast for my old eyes. He grabbed her wrist. Firm. Controlled. "Stop resisting," he warned. She struggled wildly. "I didn't do anything," she shouted. "He shouldn't even be here." Her words burned in the air. Around us, customers watched in stunned silence. Some had taken out their phones. Others stood frozen like statues. Daniel remained still, breathing heavily now, food still clinging to his apron. His dignity, wounded in a way deeper than any physical injury. The officer guided the woman backward, pulling her arms behind her. Metal cuffs clicked shut around her wrists. The sound echoed louder than anything else in that room. Handcuffs. Real. Final. "You are under arrest," the officer said. "For assault and disorderly conduct." Her voice rose into a shrill scream. "This is ridiculous. I'm the victim." No one answered her. No one defended her. Because everyone had seen what she did. Everyone had heard what she said. Another officer arrived minutes later, called by someone from the staff. The restaurant remained frozen in silence. Like time itself had paused. I realized then that I had been holding my breath. When I finally exhaled, my chest trembled. The officers escorted her toward the door. She continued shouting the entire way. Threats. Insults. Angry words that bounced off the walls and fell uselessly to the floor. But as she passed my table, something happened that I will never forget. She looked at me. Right into my eyes. Her face twisted with fury. And for a brief moment, I felt fear, real cold fear. The kind that reminds you how fragile peace truly is. Then the door opened. Bright sunlight spilled inside. And just like that, she was gone. Taken away in handcuffs. The bell above the door chimed softly as it closed. Silence followed. Deep, heavy silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Daniel stood in the center of the room, still covered in food, his shoulders rising and falling slowly with each breath. I felt tears gathering in my eyes. Not just from shock, but from something deeper. Sadness. Anger. Shame for the world we still lived in. Finally, I pushed my chair back. My legs trembled as I stood, gripping my cane tightly. Slowly, carefully, I walked toward him. He turned his head when he heard me approaching. Up close, I could see the hurt in his eyes. Not just humiliation. Pain. The kind that comes from being seen as less than human. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small handkerchief. The same kind I had carried for years. Without saying a word, I handed it to him. He hesitated, then accepted it. "Thank you, Miss Maggie," he said quietly. His voice cracked slightly. That was the moment that broke my heart. Not the shouting, not the attack, but that tiny crack in his voice. Because strong people rarely show when they're hurting. And when they do, you know the wound runs deep. Around us, other customers began to stir, whispering softly. Some approached him, offering apologies, words of support. But the room still felt fragile, like something beautiful had been damaged, like trust itself had been shaken. And as I stood there beside him, watching the last traces of food slide from his apron to the floor, I realized something terrible and true. Even after all these years, hatred had not disappeared. It had only learned to hide. Until the moment it found a place to strike. After the police took her away, the restaurant did not return to normal right away. How could it? The room still carried the echo of her voice, like thunder that lingers long after lightning fades. Even the sunlight coming through the windows seemed different. Too bright, too sharp, as if it were exposing something ugly that had always been hiding beneath the surface. Daniel stood very still, holding the handkerchief I had given him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the waiters hurried forward with a stack of clean towels. "Sir, let me help?" he said gently. Daniel nodded once. He wiped his face slowly, carefully, as if each movement required effort. Food had stained his apron and shirt, leaving marks that looked far worse than they really were. But I knew the truth. Those stains weren't the real damage. The real damage was invisible, and much harder to clean. I stepped closer, leaning slightly on my cane. "Daniel," I said softly. He looked at me. Up close, I could see how tired his eyes looked. Not physically tired, but emotionally wounded. "I'm so sorry," I told him. The words felt small compared to what had happened, but they were all I had. He shook his head gently. "You don't have to apologize, Miss Maggie," he replied. "You didn't do anything wrong." His voice was steady again, but softer than before. Still, I could hear the strain beneath it. Around us, customers began approaching one by one. A young woman stepped forward first. "That was horrible," she said, her voice trembling. "Your food is amazing. Please don't let someone like her ruin this place." Another man nodded. "She should be ashamed," he added. More voices followed. Support. Kindness. Words meant to repair what had been broken. And for the first time since the incident began, I saw something shift in Daniel's expression. Not happiness. Not yet. But gratitude. Quiet gratitude. "Thank you," he said to the group. "All of you." One of the officers who had remained behind approached Daniel. "Sir," he said respectfully, "we'll need a statement later today." Daniel nodded. "I understand." The officer paused, then added quietly, "What she did, that was unacceptable. I'm sorry you had to go through that." Daniel met his eyes. "Thank you, officer." After a few more minutes, the police left. The restaurant remained quiet, but slowly, very slowly, life began to return. Plates were cleared. Chairs were adjusted. Customers sat back down. Some stayed. Others left quietly, shaken by what they had witnessed. I returned to my table but didn't sit. Instead, I watched Daniel as he disappeared briefly into the kitchen. When he returned, he wore a clean apron. Fresh. Untouched. symbolic in a way that made my chest tighten. He walked toward the center of the room and cleared his throat. "Everyone," he said, raising his voice just enough to be heard. The remaining customers turned toward him. "I want to thank you for staying," he continued. "And I want to apologize for what happened here today." A murmur of disagreement spread across the room. "You don't owe us an apology," someone said. But Daniel continued anyway. "This restaurant was built on respect," he said. "Respect for every person who walks through that door." He paused briefly. "And that will never change." Those words settled deep inside me. I felt tears gathering in my eyes again, not from sadness this time, but from pride. Real pride. Because courage does not always look like shouting or fighting. Sometimes, courage looks like standing tall after someone tries to humiliate you. Sometimes, courage is simply refusing to become bitter. After his short speech, the room filled with gentle applause. Soft at first, then stronger. People clapped not just for the restaurant, but for him. For his dignity. For his strength. I finally sat down again, my legs trembling slightly. A few minutes later, Daniel approached my table. "Miss Maggie," he said quietly. "Yes, dear," I replied. He placed a warm bowl of soup in front of me. "My favorite. Chicken and vegetable. You didn't get to finish your meal earlier," he said. I looked up at him surprised. "You don't have to do that," I said. He smiled faintly. "I want to." I stared at the bowl for a moment. Steam rose gently into the air, carrying that familiar, comforting smell. It reminded me of all the Thursdays before this one. All the peaceful afternoons. All the simple joys. "Daniel," I said looking back at him. "What happened today? It was ugly." He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "But what you did after," I continued, "that was beautiful." His expression softened. I reached across the table and placed my wrinkled hand gently over his. "You showed strength," I said. "Real strength." He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he squeezed my hand lightly. "Thank you," he whispered. After that, he returned to work. Serving customers. Checking orders. Moving through the restaurant like he always did. But something had changed, not just in him, but in all of us who had witnessed that moment. We had seen hatred. But we had also seen resilience. And sometimes, resilience shines brighter than cruelty ever could. That evening after I returned home, I sat in my favorite chair near the window. The sky outside had turned soft shades of orange and pink. Beautiful. Peaceful. Yet my mind kept replaying the events of the day. Her voice. The food striking his face. The look in his eyes. And the sound of those handcuffs clicking shut. I had lived through many years. Through times when hatred was louder, more open, more accepted. I had hoped those days were gone. But that afternoon reminded me of something important. History does not disappear. It lingers. It waits. And sometimes, it resurfaces in moments when we least expect it. But there was another truth I carried with me that night. Something just as powerful. Kindness still exists. Courage still exists. People still stand up against cruelty. The next Thursday, I returned to Riverside Table. Of course I did. Routine matters. And loyalty matters even more. When I stepped through the door, the bell chimed like always. Warm air greeted me. The smell of fresh bread filled the room. And there he was. Daniel. Standing behind the counter. Alive. Strong. Working. When he saw me, his face lit up with that familiar smile. "Miss Maggie," he called. "Right on time." I smiled back. "Wouldn't miss it," I answered. He walked over and pulled out my chair. Just like always. Normal. Comforting. Familiar. But this time, as I sat down, I noticed something new. A small framed sign hung near the entrance. Simple. Elegant. With words written in bold letters. "Respect is served here." I stared at it for a long moment. And I felt something warm settle deep inside my chest. Hope. Yes, hope. Because hatred may still exist in this world. But so does dignity. So does justice. And so does the quiet strength of people who refuse to be broken. At 82 years old, I have learned many lessons. But that day at Riverside Table reminded me of the most important one. A person's true character is revealed not in moments of peace, but in moments of pain. And Daniel Brooks, the man who stood tall after humiliation, the man who chose dignity over anger, the man who kept serving kindness even after cruelty, he taught me something I will carry for the rest of my days. That strength is not measured by how loudly you fight, but by how firmly you stand, even when the world tries to knock you down. Open Book Sparkles.